Trawling the Antiques Roadshow archives has been a fascinating exercise. Sometimes we're laughing with the experts, other times the finds are really quite moving. Tonight, stand by to see everyday objects from the past in a totally different light. It's why we call this programme Priceless Antiques Roadshow. Here at Kenwood House in London, many important historical figures have been recorded for posterity in these imposing portraits. But in this programme, we meet some very down-to-earth heroes whose wartime endeavours might have gone unnoticed were it not for a trip to the Antiques Roadshow.
The Roadshow is very good at turning up unsung heroes. I remember one year we were at rugby.
My mother's first husband was a balloon sergeant, and he had to draw the enemy lines to try and get rid of the enemy guns.
It must have been one of the most dangerous jobs during the war.
Also, miscellaneous expert Bunny Campione steps back in time to her first appearance at a roadshow.
I had this tea with the producer, and he said, "You can't just do dolls, you know, you've got to do miscellaneous." So I said, "I'll do my best." And he said, "And another thing, you've got to lose the plum in your voice."
This is quite an unusual doll. It was made in about 1910, in France, obviously.
And ceramics specialist John Sandon tries to recreate a bit of potting history.
You're going to be digging terracotta clay out of your fingernails for weeks.
Sandons have a reputation for being about the worst potters imaginable. I don't think this is going to be a masterpiece on the future Antique Roadshow.
For our first trip to the Roadshow archives, we don't need to go back in time. More and more we're encountering examples of modern design on the show. And these are items you may remember from your grandparents' home or even your own childhood home. They're becoming very collectible. Catherine Higgins and Paul Atterbury feel there's definitely room for a bit of retro on the Roadshow.
What we often see are domestic objects that have actually changed people's lives. Whether it's an early washing machine or a washstand or a hairdryer, it doesn't matter. These are things that suddenly made life easier. And I think one of the strange things the show does is track those sociological and technical changes.
I'm pretty passionate about post-war home style, and particularly things in the late 60s and early 70s. The use of new materials and how those really revolutionised our lifestyles. I really noticed a couple of pieces that Paul did of, great plastics, the use of plastics, and how that changed our lives in the late 60s and early 70s. One memorable one was the garden egg chair.
It's an amazing object, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's obviously, it shrieks literally 60s at you, these incredible colours. It's so sort of dynamic and vibrant.
I think also we track changes in attitudes to manufacture and design. Plastic suddenly appears as something which actually you can use for furniture, you can use for clothing, you can use in all sorts of new ways.
1968 is when it was first produced. Right. And the idea was that because you can shut it, it's waterproof, it can live out of doors, it can come in-house, and it was all to do with that move of bringing the garden into the house into the garden, informal open living, which was very much part of the 1960s. And if ever there's an antique for the future, here it is. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
But equally, there are lots of extraordinary backwaters of technology where somebody thought, I've got it. I'm going to save the world and make a fortune by making a machine that does something completely ridiculous. And, of course, it doesn't work. He patents it, nobody buys it, it disappears into some black hole of history. And when those come on, that's a great moment because you look at it and you think, I can't believe somebody ever thought this was going to change the world.
The Sinclair C5 rode into UK towns in 1985 and quickly became iconic, but failed to capture the public interest.
I was fairly surprised to see, in fact shocked to see, a young guy wheeling in a Sinclair C5 in Edinburgh. Whoa, stop! Do you know, I think if this had been launched today, I think it would have been a success, don't you?
I don't know. I don't think folk would think it's cool nowadays to go about in that.
In the 1980s, this was the car of the future, or the vehicle of the future, wasn't it, really?
Yeah. I'd have liked it to take it off, though, because if it did, there was plans of 2- and 4-seater versions of it.
But it had a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, I've experienced them myself. When it's raining, that's got to be the worst one.
Oh, God, in the rain.
But you can buy jackets and they clip over here. I don't fancy one of them. Doesn't look cool.
I think that, you know, here we are. I actually drive a hybrid car, so I'm not that far away from what the Sinclair C5 was all about. And I think that, sadly, it's obviously not going to be relaunched, but I think that if it was, you know, I might even buy one. And the brake's a bit dodgy.
Yeah, they're not working. The right one is, but I just need to shove my feet out the car to stop.
I think a lot of domestic equipment is fun. It's never going to be hugely valuable because it doesn't have that intrinsic quality. It has a nostalgia appeal, it's quirky, it's quaint, it's entertaining. Good heavens, did they use those?
Did you buy this in the 1970s?
No, I'm afraid I could never have afforded it.
These are wonderful examples of well-tron products. And what we've got here is a radio, a tape player, a gramophone, all combined. It looks like a space station.
Indeed.
And you can imagine it sort of flying through space.
The impact of space and space technology has been huge since the 1950s. Partly it really has given us a better life. We've got things like non-stick saucepans, we've got hugely improved domestic electronics. We've also got this strange fascination with space style. We've got table lighters that look like Sputniks and satellites. We've got radios and televisions that look like space helmets and flying saucers.
I've seen a sort of alarm clock radio.
Yes, I got one of those.
Have you?
Yes, I got one of those.
It looks like the control panel of a spaceship.
Yes, that's right, yes, yes.
And this, the space ball, plays something very long forgotten called an 8-track cassette.
Yes, that's right.
Most domestic equipment is ephemeral. You buy it largely for style reasons, and you use it, and then you either get a better one or the technology changes. And what happens, of course, is things that are left behind, they may become collectible, but of course they become very rare. You know, the classic is something called 8-track stereo. Now, nobody in their right mind today would listen to 8-track stereo. But you did at the time because it was the latest thing. And therefore all the equipment built for 8-track stereo is now completely redundant. But people collect it for that reason.
Do you still have some of those?
I've got a few, but unfortunately they're jolly hard to get hold of. And the only one we've got that plays well is Down Mexico Way by Tijuana Brass.
Hard luck.
Really?
It's marvellous.
It absolutely was.
If we kind of wind fast forward the clock, I think that we'll probably see a lot of electronics that are around us today coming into the roadshow. I suspect we'll see a lot of Apple products. I think the fact that we've got such dinky little portables in lots of different colours, 10 years' time, I might be seeing those and people will be going, I've collected every different colour of my iPod. You know, that's what it'll be.
Catherine Higgins and Paul Atterbury reminding us how design and technology has produced some modern classics. And reliving another classic moment, miscellaneous expert Bunny Campioni takes us back to her very first time in front of the cameras.
Well, back in, I think it was 1985, I was running the doll department at Sotheby's. And I had a very exciting world record doll that hit the headlines. In one of the main papers the next day, it had me in profile with the doll, in brackets, Bunny on the left. But after that, so many dolls came on the roadshow that I think my name was put forward. I had this tea with the producer, and I was quite nervous, because when you're nervous, and he said, you can't just do dolls, you know, you've got to do miscellaneous. So I said, I'll do my best. And he said, and another thing, you've got to lose the plum in your voice. So my first roadshow was at Worcester, and I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And David Batty came up to me very generously and said, with a whole lot of lantern slides, which were glass in frames. And he said, Bunny, I wonder if you'd like to do this as your first record. And I said, well, thank you, David, I'd love to. And as I took them from him, one of them slid because it was very loose in its frame and smashed on the ground. And I handed them back, burst into tears and rushed to the loo, and I thought, what am I doing on this show? And I thought, really, have I made a mistake? And then this doll came in.
Oh, let me have a look. This is marvellous. This is your doll?
No, it belongs to my mother.
It belongs to your mother? Yes. Well, it would, because you're not old enough for it to be yours. Now, at the back of the head, I'm going to take this off here. It is SFBJ, which in fact stands for Société de Fabrication de Bébés Jouets. So we all say SFBJ because it's a bit too much of a mouthful. It was made in about 1910. Some people call it a laughing jumeau.
I was very nervous. Luckily, I knew about it, and it's really a conversation between two people, and you have to forget about those millions out there that are watching.
The eyes, as you know, open and close, and they're very nice because very often with this mould you get black eyes, and these are very nice blue ones. Pity she hasn't got any clothes.
Yes.
But you've kept her very carefully.
Quite carefully.
Yes, she's in very good condition. I always marvel that they don't have any cracks. And I would put her value, and I would say an auction value of around £1,000.
I think I said about £1,000. Which was a lot of money in 1987, which I think was my first roadshow.
Getting to know more about roadshow experts and their interests has been fascinating. Take ceramics expert John Sandon. He began collecting as a child under the tutelage of Dad Henry and has never lost his passion for pots.
I've totally grown up with pottery and porcelain from the very earliest age, and so it's in my heart, it's in my blood. I've never known anything else, really. By doing it myself, I can really appreciate just how difficult these actual tasks are. Porcelain is so fine and so perfect. I mean, there's really such a total contrast with slipware. Nothing really conveys the potter's art more than slipware. It's not done with great care, it's done with a spirit. And the enjoyment of the potter making it really comes through on the pieces that one sees. On the roadshow, when I've handled really great pieces of slipware, one is partly in awe of the enormous value of them, but also have the greatest respect for the potters who made them. And you can feel so close to the potters who made them. I have one piece of slipware, which is actually quite a special one. It's a rather basic piece indeed, this humble chamber pot. It dates from the middle of the 17th century. I mean, about as basic a piece of pottery as you can get. You really feel the hand of the potter here throwing the clay on the wheel and then just drawing these letters so crudely and roughly. It is so spontaneous and so natural. And the potter's had such trouble with his lettering and fitting the design on. I suspect if I have a go at slipware, I may have the same troubles.
We'll soon find out. John's come to Aylesford Friary in Kent to have a go at creating some slipware of his own.
I've always been terrified of doing it myself because I feel somehow it's not as easy as it looks.
Alan Paris and Bill Biles have been creating perfect pots here at the Friary for many years. So they won't be at all thrown by the prospect of a complete novice like John.
The wonderful smell of wet clay. Hello.
Oh yeah, I'm Alan.
Hello there.
Hello there. This is Bill.
Hello there.
Hello,
Bill.
Yeah, pleased to meet you.
Right.
You won't be covered in terracotta.
No, that's not too much.
Are you ready for a bit of slipware?
Really looking forward to it.
Good. That's it, and you're pushing from there.
Right, so that's pushing it over, and then...
First thing you've got to do is to get that piece of clay in the centre.
In the middle, yes.
I'll centre it for you, and then you can feel what it's meant to be like. Right. You're going to be digging terracotta clay out of your fingernails for weeks.
I think I've got Worcester clay in my blood, but this is a different kind of clay. I mean, not quite... I don't think it's quite in the middle, but maybe I can save it.
Just try and make the sides a little bit thinner. That's it, yeah.
Sandons have a reputation for being about the worst potters imaginable. I don't think this is going to be a masterpiece on the future Antique Roadshow. Split flat. It's a plate, not a bowl. It's round and...
it's not ended up on the wall, so that's great.
It certainly gives you respect for the potters of the past when you actually try and do it yourself.
Now John can try decorating. There's no room for precision here. Since slipware was first made some 6,000 years ago, it's always been about spontaneity.
I suspect I'll probably make a total mess of it, but it's only by having a try I'll really understand just what slipware is all about. You're just mixing two different sorts of clay and bringing them together to form the pattern. One sort of clay decorating another. Pouring it on there and swirling it around. It's difficult to keep it even, isn't it?
And then just try dragging your finger through the centre of it.
Decoration through that. I give it a bit too much slip there. This is not easy, is it? Not very good. I don't think sgraffito is my forte somehow. I hope I'll be better at slip trailing.
The greatest examples of English slipware were made in the 1600s and 1700s. Decorating with slip is a bit like icing a cake, but with very runny clay. The main thing to remember is that you have to apply just the right amount of pressure.
The top came off my slip tray. It's an interesting decorative effect. You certainly feel very close to the clay using it in this way. It really is fun. Ozzie the owl is decorated with little rows of tiny dots like this. It feels like you're using paint, but of course it's so much runnier. So there we have a bird of paradise flower in the traditions of Staffordshire slipware. All my own handiwork. I'm amazed at being able to do that.
Yeah, very good. No, you've done very well.
Don't suppose you'd like a Saturday job, would you?
I think I've enjoyed it, but I think I'll leave it to the professionals. I'll be looking at slipware in a rather different eye now. It's actually a lot more simple to do than I ever imagined, but that doesn't in any way denude the great wares of the past. The skill is in the mind of the potter who drew those wonderful designs on the dishes, and the great ones of the 17th and 18th century are still just as magical. At least I now know a lot more about how they were made. Who knows, one day someone will bring along a John Sandon slipware dish to the Antique Roadshow.
And here's John's attempt, freshly fired. Not bad for a beginner. History tends to record deeply detailed accounts of important battles and the actions of military leaders, but the everyday lives of men and women in wartime can take second place. For our next visit to the Roadshow archives, we're meeting again visitors who brought us revealing accounts and graphic reminders of some unsung heroes of war. It was the bravery of thousands of servicemen and women doing their duty, as well as the selfless actions of ordinary people, that allowed the war machine to carry on.
I think one of the things the Roadshow does, and I particularly seem to do, is rescue stories from oblivion, extraordinary achievements by family members very often that are actually going to go down the tubes. They're never going to be heard of again. We must show people out there what happened. It's the unobvious that will get lost. And I think, to me, this is one of the primary functions of this show. I don't actually care about values very much. I want to know that we've nailed that story and it's there in some archive, should we ever need it.
The Roadshow is very good at turning up unsung heroes. I remember one year we were at rugby.
This is a remarkable collection of things from the First World War. You've got drawings here, photographs, and these incredibly atmospheric drawings. This is quite extraordinary. It's entitled A British Biplane Attack on a Boche Balloon. And this other one here, which I think is also very exciting as well. People up in a balloon actually making maps. And I noticed the name here, Bernard Hugh. Tell me about Bernard Hugh.
Well, Bernard Hugh was my mother's first husband, and he was a balloon sergeant, and he had to draw the enemy lines and note where their fire was coming from to try and get rid of the enemy guns.
Well, that's incredible. It must have been one of the most dangerous jobs during the war.
And of course, the person who had actually drawn these pictures, can you imagine him up in a balloon over enemy lines? He could so easily have been shot out of the sky. Of course, these people were heroes and very heroic. But he also was an extremely good artist. These pictures are absolutely tremendous. It is so extraordinary that we're able to show on the roadshow these items to a very wide public, these wonderful, wonderful men who helped the war.
Although the Balloon Corps were practically sitting targets, Bernard Hugh managed to avoid German bullets for the rest of the war. But by World War II, battles in the sky had become much more perilous.
There are occasions when you meet a member of the public who come out with the most fantastic stories. And I remember back at Highcliffe Castle, I think, again it must be a couple of years ago, this gentleman was in my queue and I just noticed in his lapel he had a little caterpillar. I notice in your lapel you're wearing the famous caterpillar badge, only given to those people who bailed out during the Second World War over occupied territory.
Yeah, we've been to Italy and we're coming back over France and the pilot was killed and the rest of us bailed out. But after bailing out, I was in an orange suit. The German pilot thought that we were dropping ammunition and guns to the French resistance. So he opened fire on me and hit the parachute quite a few places. So,
you came down a bit quicker than you'd hoped to?
Came down, we had a double fracture of the back, but the Germans took me to hospital.
And how long did you spend in hospital?
34 weeks.
Wow, a long time. And then after that you went to camp?
Released me to go to Satellite 4B.
And he brought in with him this rather scruffy, folded dirt painting, really, because there was no pigment in a prisoner of war camp.
The Russian compound was wired off from us. We had not a hard time, but it wasn't easy, but they had a terrible time. They had practically no food. And they knew I was sort of friendly towards them. And I used to give them my potato peelings every day, and they were grateful for that. The man standing up at a lookout, they were cooking a meal in the open, and if the Germans had seen them cooking a meal outside, they would have shot them.
And one got an amazing feeling of, his life in a German prisoner of war camp and the deprivations they went through. I mean, he gave these Russian prisoners his peelings from his potatoes because they had absolutely nothing and were starving. So you bought this?
Well, I bought it for 2 cigarettes, yeah.
Which was a huge amount.
Well, 2 cigarettes is worth £100 in over there.
Amazing story.
Yeah.
Really extraordinary times. It was an extremely moving tale. And I remember that when we came to the end of the recording, there was a complete silence with the 50 people standing around. And this gentleman was so quiet, unassuming, and a real hero. I felt very privileged to be there that day.
While some individuals were called upon to make huge personal sacrifices, others banded together to keep the war effort moving at home.
The one that I always think of, which simply was provoked by a photograph of a wonderfully beautiful woman taken in the 1930s. We're looking at a photograph of your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And where did she come from? What was her background?
She was born in India.
Yes.
1913.
Right.
And then she went to Singapore and married her first husband, who was killed in the defence of Singapore.
What was he?
He was in the RAF.
Oh, he was a pilot, right?
Yeah, he was a pilot. They had a 6-month-old baby when the Japanese invaded. She managed to get out with the baby.
Yeah.
He unfortunately died en route in Durban.
The story that unrolled from that photograph was very emotive, because she lost her husband, she lost her baby son, she had the most terrible life. But she came back to Britain from the Middle East in the 1940s after the fall of Singapore, and the only skill she had, she'd learnt to fly.
She had a pilot's licence from a young age.
So she was already a pilot?
Yeah, and she volunteered herself for the Air Transport Auxiliary.
As a delivery pilot? Right.
And ferried aircraft around the country.
This was women delivery pilots flying Air Force aeroplanes to the bases from the factories. A vital role, which is completely forgotten. You know, Douglas Bader is shot down, jumps out of his aeroplane, parachutes down, back at the mess that evening, drinking the beer. Next morning, he's got a new Spitfire. Where's it come from? Well, a girl has delivered it.
And these are her logbooks. Here we are in 1943, and every day, and sometimes twice a day, she's taking an aeroplane from somewhere to somewhere, crisscrossing Britain, all sorts of very complicated journeys. This is wartime Britain. You've got the risk of being shot down by marauding German aircraft.
She had to fly endless varieties of aeroplanes. Most male Air Force pilots would have flown 2, 3, 4, half a dozen types of plane. She flew over 40. She flew big things like Mosquitoes and Wellingtons. She flew Spitfires. And I thought, God, how did she have the skill to do this? And she was one of a whole team of women.
Joan's stepdaughter and her husband were delighted to find their personal story was of so much interest to roadshow specialists.
We were pleased to have Joan's life actually highlighted on the Antiques Roadshow because it's made me actually appreciate that the girls in the ATA were these wonderful women. And she wrote this all in a diary, which we have. And it's been absolutely wonderful just to sit and read that diary.
The lady was someone who we'd know nothing about. She has no reputation, she has no fame. All that remained of her was a photograph and her logbooks. That's it, you know, a whole life has vanished except for some pieces of paper. And I think that what she did was a huge achievement.
I think the women were heroic. Joan would never have said she was heroic. Joan would never even think that her life was any different than anybody else's. But what she's been through in her life, I think, was heroic.
Some great stories, thankfully preserved by the children of those who found themselves in conflict. And that's it for this episode. Next time we show some of the best and worst fakes ever to grace the roadshow.
I'm afraid it's bad news. You can't pussyfoot around it. I mean, how can you? You've got to tell the person that it's not right. It's a forgery.
Is it?
Not only is it a forgery, it is illegal. And, yeah, I suppose I am blunt.
We reveal that there's more to one of our specialists than cuddly toys.
Here we have a DB5, and this is the actual car that was in the film Casino Royale.
I'm going to stroke it gently.
Yes.
As if it was Daniel Craig.
You wish it was.
And why were these people so happy at their roadshow moment of fame?
This one isn't damaged.
How much is that worth?
Somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000.
You know, I wanted to kiss him when he said there was, you know, they were worth what they were worth.
Do you want to buy them?
And I apologise now that I did that on television. But he was a very handsome expert.
That's all coming up next time. Bye-bye.
Star of The Queen and Frost Nixon actor Michael Sheen on The One Show on BBC One now. Winter gives way to spring here on BBC Two, and a new cast of characters emerge bleary-eyed from hibernation in Yellowstone. And on BBC Three, a shocking alien encounter for Donna in Doctor Who.